The SAG-AFTRA Foundation has a COVID-19 relief fund to support SAG-AFTRA performers who are in urgent need as this pandemic continues. Since March of 2020, the foundation has given over $6.1 million in aid to 6,500 performers and families facing extreme hardship. If you are a SAG-AFTRA member and you need help, please ask. And if you are able to help support our community and this crucial effort, please give. Information can be found in the description of this video. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Sienna Miller.
Hi.
Hi. Great to talk to you again, Sienna, and thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, well, I guess first tell us the last time you and I spoke, you were in London. So are you still there?
No, I'm now in the countryside. I've got a cottage, a 16th century thatched cottage that I am in because we're
Oh, how
locked.
lovely.
Yeah.
And right, so you were in production on Anatomy of a Scandal, the
Mm.
Netflix series, and that now I'm assuming the production has been paused.
It paused for a week, but I'm going back on Monday. So yeah, they're going to give it a go and try to keep working, which is amazing in this moment that that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, how has has the experience felt dramatically different under the circumstances, or is it kind of business as usual with the addition of PPE and so forth?
The PPE really changes things because I realize you spend so much time reading people's faces and there's so little to see of each person on set. So it definitely feels different, but at the same time, so thrilling to be able to go and have something to do. I was going a little bit stir crazy, and so it's definitely has moments where it feels normal, but nothing feels that normal at the moment for any of us.
Oh, certainly. And another sort of phenomenon that you went through is that your latest film, Wander Darkly, began at Sundance and then finally saw a release to video on demand, and I believe some theaters from Lionsgate in December. So, and because of the pandemic, you were kind of, divorced from what is the normal ecosystem of what a movie goes through. And so, in terms of like doing press and promoting the movie and getting the word out there, what was that experience like in terms of Wander Darkly?
In some ways it was great because I didn't have to travel, but you miss that magic of being in front of people. I love talking to people, and Zooming from my bedroom on a press tour is just it did get quite old quite quickly. But yeah, I'm so glad that we had Sundance because we had that experience of collective kind of celebration and but it's been strange. It has been slightly strange.
Certainly, but I've now seen you twice in this process, so that's kind of nice. That's definitely unusual. So as far as Wander Darkly goes, this is a very tragic story that ultimately comes to a hopeful end, but it's often a challenging sit. And so when this project came to you, how did you feel like it echoed your sensibilities and tastes as an actor? But then also maybe how did it challenge them?
It definitely felt grounded in a however surreal the movie is, it felt surreal in a way that I could sort of relate to. There was a real authenticity to it and it felt truthful. I think I love the idea of examining grief from a really internal place as that character. I mean, she really kind of is disorientated and discombobulated, but she really minds that experience and emerges quite triumphant at the end from it. I think that I don't know what it was about the script. It felt very romantic, and I hadn't done something that felt like that with that kind of level of truthfulness in regards to a relationship and how it's their relationship is totally imperfect, and they go back to the beginning of it and they get to examine the moments where they went wrong, and that was an interesting premise. And I guess it just felt like it would be really challenging, and it was. I knew that I like to really push myself, and I knew that would push me, which it definitely did.
Well, yeah, well, you say, you talk about how Adrienne is sort of discombobulated. And I imagine that experience was the same for you as the performer, because the way the film is structured, sort of past and present are bleeding into one another. Did you find that a disorienting experience to shoot?
It was completely disorienting. She doesn't have any idea where she is, what is real, what is not, what's in her imagination. So she's very, very lost. And I think, when I started shooting, I was like, I feel completely lost in this. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I am. And then I realized that, of course, that's exactly what I should be feeling if I was absorbing any of her experience. But it was also, it's an independent film. We shot it in 24 days. It was 17, 18-hour days, and bouncing around in the schedule. So one morning I might have to do intense grief, and then in the afternoon I'd be with the little girl, and that would be happy. And you're so kind of rung around on those movies where there's not a budget and the schedule is just, whatever you can do to get it done. But I think I kind of like that. I like being pushed in that way.
Yeah, I mean, and when you're shooting out of order and for scenes that are unfolding out of order, how do you sort of keep track of like, okay, this is where Adrian is now, but it's not necessarily where I was, earlier in the day doing this other scene?
You just have to sort of do your best. But it was really technically confusing. So I had a color-coded script of like, this is pink was the present, blue was the past, with highlighters and stuff, so that I kind of could map, because often it would pivot within a scene between different time zones. And you just have to really trust your director and your co-star. And thankfully I had Diego Luna to kind of look into his eyes, and he would just ground me, and and has such a directorial brain himself that he was a really solid co-star. And then Tara Mealy, who wrote and directed it, it was her story. She really experienced something similar to this. So she was again a really great touchstone. But yeah, there were days where I felt completely schizophrenic, completely mad. Like I don't know how it worked. I was convinced that this movie would be not good, because I was just so lost. And then it's always such a relief when something comes out and it's made in this edit, and the VFX, which at the time felt impossible. Suddenly they'd get a hose pipe and fill up a room with a little bit of water, and it looked crazy. And the director said, but this is going to turn into the sea. And we were like, yeah, right, with our budget, how does that work? And then I saw the movie and I was like, wow, they did such a great job. But at the time, it was crazy. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that you thought maybe it wasn't going to be good. Was this during this was during the making of the movie? Because obviously you must have had a lot of faith in the script initially.
Yes, I love the script. I love the people who are creatively involved. I just didn't trust anything that I was doing. And I guess that feeling of like utter confusion, which I thought was just me being, I don't know, having some sort of minor meltdown, was actually Adrian's total state of mind. And I don't think of myself as method per se. Like I definitely can mess around in between takes, and but things do kind of trickle in. And I think that I trust now that happens when I work, that I slightly absorb some of the energy of the person that I'm playing.
Well, that's an interesting question that you bring up, because, and it's something I've been asking a lot of actors recently. Earlier in the week, Nicole Kidman was on the Mark Maron podcast, and she talked about how being in The Undoing made her feel sort of physically ill, even when she wasn't shooting, and she had this sort of loss of self. Is it easier for you to just like wash the skin of these characters off, or have there been ones, such as Wander Darkly, or another example, where you took it home with you maybe longer than you would have liked to?
I first had that experience with Factory Girl. I think I ran around in a pair of tights and a leotard for a good 3 months after I finished filming that. And on that movie, it was so fun being Edie Sedgwick that I don't think I just was Edie Sedgwick the entire time. So I was really fully method on that one. I think when they kind of break your heart, like I did this film American Woman, and that I love that woman so much, that character that I played. And I think they stay in you, but it is hard to shake it. It definitely takes a little bit of time. Although this one Wander Darkly was so exhausting. I think by the end of it, I just crashed and slept, and it didn't haunt me as much as some of those other two probably did.
Yeah. So you mentioned American Woman, which from 2018 or 2019. And that is a fantastic movie, and one that, at least from my observation, that seemed like a really major step for you dramatically. And you're also the lead of the movie, and you're probably in every frame of the movie, commanding every scene. Did that movie sort of change the kind of projects that you're starting to field now? And did it change maybe the ones that are coming to you?
I think everything has an effect. I did feel really proud of that as a film, and it was again a tiny movie, a labor of love, but I felt I gained something from it, because I felt like I was able to stand on my own 2 feet in a way that I hadn't really trusted before. I think that because I love that character so much, and it was so textured and there was such a huge arc. I think it's probably spoilt me somewhat that I would look for something that has that kind of density and is that challenging and maybe not as heavy. I would love to do something with a bit more levity after these really intense films that I keep making. But yeah, I sort of feel like I'm open to everything. I love just real characters, just very, very different people to myself. That's kind of what excites me.
Another film that you worked on recently, just walking backwards from Wonder Darkly, was 21 Bridges, with Chadwick Boseman, who I understand gave you a portion of his salary at the end of the film. Can you talk about the experience of working with him? Because everyone, all of his colleagues have had just such immensely lovely things to say about him, and obviously it seems like you had the same experience.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever met anyone who radiated that kind of power. He was so immensely powerful and just wise and kind and good and insanely talented and respectful. And I was such a huge fan of his. I was so excited to do that film, and the fact that he donated some of his salary to get me, to a fair number was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I don't know that there are other men in Hollywood who would, or it's certainly never happened to me. And obviously pay disparity is a big part of our industry and something that is being addressed. And it wasn't done with any fanfare. It wasn't showy. I don't know if he even ever told anyone. And I never told anyone because of that until he died. And I felt like it was such a testament to who he was as a person. I loved him and I missed him. And it's just awful how these incredible people, we lose these people so young, because I imagine he would have gone on to make so many beautiful films, but also so grateful to have spent any amount of time with him,
Yeah, everyone who's worked with him, he seemed to have made a real impact on.
Yeah.
And interestingly, 21 Bridges is kind of a genre thriller kind of a movie, which you've dabbled in many times, of course. But when you were talking about Factory Girl earlier, I was thinking about how that movie was really kind of a breakout for you, but you never sold out or like went super mainstream after that. I mean, was that on purpose, or were you just from the beginning, were you always sort of choosy about the kind of roles you wanted to take on?
Yeah, I think at the time the roles in the bigger movies were very like girlfriendy, wifey, like not challenging. I did this movie, G.I. Joe, that was a genre movie, and I was kind of talked into doing it, and it was not the kind of thing that I would really be into normally, but it was a strategy move, and my agents were like, you've got to be in something that's commercial and makes money, and it was I was so confused by that, by trying to be a villain in rubber and shoot guns, which I couldn't do without blinking, so they had to have sunglasses on me every time I fired a weapon. Like, I was a disaster as a villain. I think that experience probably made me realize that unless I love something, there's no point in going to do it, unless there's like a great, an enormous paycheck and you kind of need something. But I think after a while of, I've done back-to-back indies now, I think I'm ready for like a big set, and, it's kind of nice to be on something that has a budget where you're not hitchhiking to work and you're like, and the schedule is a little less punishing. And, but I want that to be with a great director. I don't want to just do anything. So I figure if I keep making these little ones, and then, one day I've done enough good little ones that someone will offer me a great big one.
Well, you mentioned theater, and I know it's one of your great loves. And I saw you a couple years ago in the National Theater Live broadcast of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, in which you play Maggie the cat, one of the great roles in theater in this Tennessee Williams play. And it's a really interesting character. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about maybe what you learned from playing that character and living in that sort of sweaty Southern Gothic world of Tennessee Williams, language.
I mean, he writes women like no one in the world. The female characters in his plays are always just these kind of damaged, broken, fiery, just heaven on earth. And obviously Maggie is one of the great roles. Again, I don't know how you top that. That was just such an incredible experience. She doesn't stop talking. I did I think 120 shows of that. So by the end of it, you feel much more like a fine-tuned instrument. You're kind of so in a zone with something, and the language great plays just carries you. You know, she's just a fully formed being that like leaps off the page. And I again, that nearly killed me. That was so tiring, but just riveting. You know, just you never know what she's going to do, and then you get spoiled because then you read a movie script and you're like, well, that's not Tennessee Williams, it's not Maggie the cat. You know, how do you find that in film? But yeah, I was so tired at the end of it, and we'd had several things go wrong. Big Mama got sick, and so we had an understudy, and there was all this drama around that production, and they wanted to bring it to Broadway, and they asked us in, I think, week 10, and we were just like, we can't, I couldn't face doing it. And then, of course, at the time when it would have been on Broadway, I was desperate to go and say those words again. But yeah, that's one thing I regret.
When you do a play, and maybe a play like Cat on the Hot Tin Roof, like for example, did you look at all to the Elizabeth Taylor version of Maggie the Cat, or did you really try and not look at other examples? Do you try to just build the character yourself?
I do try to build it myself because I think if I was to watch the Elizabeth Taylor version, I would just do that. I would copy it, and it was a very different production. It was a very kind of minimal set, quite an experimental theatre director, and he wanted them to be more like the Trumps and less kind of, you know. So there was a ton of stuff going on that wouldn't have really worked. And but yes, having done the play, I then went and watched the movie, and I was glad I didn't, because you just would copy her completely. I tried to make it my own thing.
And so then walking back a little bit, there were a number of films. You were in a number of pretty serious big dramas. In the mid 2010s, like Clint Eastwood's American Sniper, Bennett Miller's Foxcatcher, and James Gray's The Lost City of Z. And those are all kind of major auteurs of the moment. Even though you're playing this sort of wife or girlfriend, if you will, character in these movies, you certainly imbue them with a complication that's sort of wholly your own. And so I'm curious, why was it important for you to work with those filmmakers?
I think if any of those filmmakers ever asked me to do anything, I would jump. You know, Foxcatcher, it was such a tiny role, but Bennett Miller is such a great, as you said, auteur, and I'd probably make the tea on any of those sets just to be in the presence of those brilliant minds. Yeah, and that's not, you know, I would jump if someone said, and it was, you know, those great directors. It was just really fortuitous that I had that year. It felt really like a magical thing, and I don't quite know how it happened, but yeah, I'd love to work with any of them again in a heartbeat.
And you know, in The Lost City of Z, I think you're certainly one of the most memorable characters, and also you are the final shot of the movie, and it's one that I think about very often, and it's sort of a beautiful ending to that story, and it's wonderful that you get to sort of carry that message.
Yeah, that was important to James because again, when I first read that script, she definitely felt wifey, that part. And so we would have these script read-throughs, and I'd sit next to James, who's now one of my best friends in the world, but and write on his script, "This needs work," in like marker, and sort of vandalize his script to try to get it, you know, to make her more substantial, which he was really invested in doing. And I think that act of giving her the final shot as being the person that's left, and all that confusion, was a kind of testament to his honor to make it substantial, you know. And I think I agree, it's such a beautiful shot. That whole movie feels like a Visconti movie. I'm so excited that I was in it, because it just felt like you know, the kind of film that no one makes anymore. And he has such a vast, exquisite knowledge of cinema. It felt, yeah, it was a magical one. That.
Oh, it's interesting that you say that the character felt wifey, and that you give some input to try and flesh her out a little bit more. Is this something that you've done in other films as well? I mean, do you find that directors are encouraging of receiving your notes, or is that a situation where you're going to them and saying, look, I have this idea about the character?
Yeah, you'd hope that I think a good director would be receptive to a conversation, and if it sort of makes sense in the script. You know, I think I'm quite English about these things. I don't know, I'd be like, I need more. But with James, somehow we had this vernacular that was just hysterical, and we just had known each other for a long time, and I felt comfortable enough to do that. But he was also very invested in doing that with me. So that was a conversation that we'd had before I even signed on, that we were going to work on it together. And yeah, we'd send each other messages late at night, and he'd stay up till 2 a.m. rewriting things and texting them back, and he's such a passionate filmmaker. But there are certain filmmakers I don't think I would have said to Bennett, you know, I think I made one joke about something when we were doing Foxcatcher, because I was, you know, that movie was so amazing, but it's just not about that character, you know. And I was happy to be the filler and happy to not push it with something like that, just to be around the company of those actors and him.
So now I was also wondering, is there a role that you turned down that you later regretted turning down? If you can talk about it. I don't know how that works, if you've signed something where you can't say anything.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things, and then you don't want to be the person that's, you know, you don't know whether the person that ended up doing it ever knows that, you know what I mean? So I would just not want to even comment. I've definitely made some mistakes, but I've done them out of loyalty. Like, I was attached to a tiny movie that called Camille, which really, I think, straight to radio. It was really sweet. We had the best time making it, but it was like a little microscopic thing, and I got offered a big studio exciting comedy, and I didn't do it because I didn't want to bail on the indie. And then I'm like, this is a business. I'm such an idiot looking back. You know, we could have pushed, or we could have, but I just, you know, and I think everything happens for a reason. But I'm kind of playing the long game anyway. I think I want to be doing this when I'm 80, and I don't need to do everything now, and can't really have regrets, except not doing Cat on a Hot Tin Roof on Broadway. That was a regret.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems anyway like you get more nourishment from these smaller independent movies than you do from some huge movie like a G.I. Joe or whatever anyway.
That's true. It's true. You know that everybody's there because they love it. It's definitely a kind of more passionate environment and less waiting around, which I'm not good at.
Now, I also wonder, what is a project of yours that you feel didn't get its due, and why? One that has come up is Interview with Steve Buscemi. But I wondered, you know, maybe along with that one or others, you know, what's the project that you feel like should have gotten more attention?
I don't know. I don't really think about things in those terms. I mean, I loved American Woman, and I would have loved more people to have seen that film, but it's tough. It's hard for an independent film to have like a huge life unless it kind of catches some wave, and that's very abstract how that can happen. And but that one was, I think that's the thing that I was most invested in the success of it. And I remember it came out and it was at the Angelica, and I'd sometimes check to see if people had booked tickets. I've never done anything like that in my life, but I was so like, it was like a baby. It was like a child. And I loved Jake, our director. So, you know, we just cared about it so deeply, and it had been such a struggle to get it made. And then we finally did, and then it wasn't bought at Toronto, and then it finally was. And you know, it was just like a painful experience, and something that I really loved as a film and as a character. And that was probably the one that I cared about the most. But I've done a lot of small films. I don't really have any idea of how many people have seen them all. I do know that when American Sniper came out and it was massive, that was a very good feeling, but I haven't really had that since.
Yeah, that was an easy one to gauge, of course, because that movie was everywhere. Whereas, you know, American Woman, you really had to seek out. But I see it now in a lot of streaming services, and I know of a lot of people who've gone, you know, who've discovered it now. And I think it is having a maybe more of a life now than it did necessarily in theaters.
That's good, because we've got nothing else to do except binge content. So it's a good moment to find film.
Yeah, and to that point, what are some of your favorite? I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but what are some of your favorite things that you've watched or discovered during this period?
I'm not a huge. I don't watch a huge amount of TV. I watched Forrest Gump with my daughter last night, and that was amazing. I hadn't seen it for a long time, and it was so beautiful. I watched The Undoing because everybody did. Apparently more people watch that than Game of Thrones, which is amazing. I'm also working with that group, that writer and producers on the show that I'm doing now. So it was interesting to see that. Tiger King, again, all of us binge that first lockdown. That feels like this year. I feel like it's one big COVID year. So that was actually last year. I don't even know. Oh, I just watched
Tiger King.
The Father.
The Father. Oh,
my God.
Amazing.
Unbelievable. That performance is, I mean, it was just unbelievable. And my father has dementia, and we are at that moment of deciding whether he goes into a home. It couldn't have been more poignant, and God, he's just the most astounding actor, Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, I kind of avoided it for a little while because I was like, oh, here we go. This looks like Oscar bait. But no, I described it to my friend as Michael Haneke's Amour, but directed by David Lynch, because it really is kind of this surreal, disorienting experience. It really is amazing.
And it's his first movie, right? Florian Zeller. Is that his first film?
Yeah. That's from his play that he adapted into a movie.
It's ridiculous to come out and that's your first movie. Oh, I saw Pieces of a Woman, which I thought was pretty brilliant too. She's fantastic in it.
Yeah, she is excellent. I mean, she's in another movie that's coming out soon called The World to Come, which is a kind of a lesbian romance, and she's really good in that too.
Yeah.
Oh, and so I did also want to ask, so you're starring in this sort of Me Too thriller kind of mini series for Netflix, Anatomy of a Scandal. And I know you've been in the middle of shooting it. And what can you tell us about your character? Sophie Whitehouse is her name. And also what we can kind of expect from the show, and just in a general sense.
You know, it definitely tonally feels very similar to The Undoing. It's definitely within that world. It's also a 6-hour drama. It's kind of the same format, and it's David E. Kelley, and he has quite a specific way of telling a story. Sophie Whitehouse, as you might have guessed, is a very proper English lady. It's such a posh name, isn't it? And it's sort of the unraveling of, from my character's perspective, of the psychology of how well do you know the people that you live with, that you think you understand, and you know, she's trying to hold everything together, but she's unraveling. Michelle Dockery is a barrister who is prosecuting the trial, and she's a powerhouse and wonderful woman. And Rupert Friend is my husband. It's kind of the interweaving plots of the barrister and myself, and lots of scandal, as you might have guessed again from the title.
So it sounds like you're going to get a lot of screen time in this one.
Yeah, it's a lot, but it's good.
And how far along into the production do you think that you are?
We shot for 2 months, and we have 2 more. And it's every day in London, it's crazy. COVID numbers are kind of tripling, and everything is shut down, but the film industry is somehow managing to keep going. So I hope that it won't go on too much longer after that, but we'll see. Hard to predict right now.
Yeah, well, do you feel there's going to be a good sort of rebound for the industry after all of this? I mean, just as a journalist, I am seeing so many massive projects being announced constantly, and that it's hard to keep up with. And I don't know when they're all going to get started, or when the old ones are even going to come out. But it does seem like things are going in a positive direction, ish.
I hope so. I think people have really enjoyed kind of revisiting films and cinema and during this period. And I think we need that kind of connection that film inspires, you know. I can't wait to just sit in a dark room with a bunch of strangers and watch a movie like that. People say that cinema is dead and that they're not going to be any more, but I think people will also create that collective experience. But no, it's great. I agree with you. It does feel like it's a pretty loud moment for the film industry, and I wonder if that's related to this weird time.
What do you remember what the last movie you saw in the theater was?
Oh my goodness. That's 10 years ago. It feels like it feels so long ago. What was the last movie I saw? Probably Wonder Darkly at Sundance, which is so embarrassing because it was my own film. I don't normally watch them. But it was, again, that was such a labor of love, and the fact that it had got there, and you know, watching a movie in Sundance is always fantastic. But that was the last one.
Hopefully we'll all get to watch another one soon. I think for me it was Promising Young Woman. Was
that recently that you saw that in a cinema?
No. That was like right. I saw it in a screening like right before everything sort of shuttered. Yeah. Right. Thanks so much, Sienna, for joining us and talking to us today. It's been a pleasure, as always. On behalf of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, we want to thank you for joining us and for sharing your experience, process, and craft with your fellow performers.
Thank you.